So I welcome you to my talk, Taking Shortcuts Beyond Your IDE. I have like a little quiz. Can you find the shortest path here? So I guess no one of you thought of this, because I think in this talk it's also a bit about thinking outside the box. I think here literally. So I also would like to start with some questions. Who of you likes to save time? Yeah, I thought so. A lot of people. And who of you uses shortcuts frequently other than those 5 typical ones? Oh, good. So, my name is Anne Recker. I'm a frequent shortcut user, and I have a bachelor's degree in computer science and roughly about 8 years of programming experience. And since May 2024, I'm a software engineer at Open Value Switzerland. Open Value is a consulting company mostly in Europe. But coincidentally, since January 2025, there's also Open Value services in the US. So in case someone is interested, you can ask me about it. And I am from Switzerland, as you saw, so I also brought some Swiss chocolate. But I hope that you don't only stay for the chocolate, also for my talk. So I often use shortcuts, and I sometimes experienced that colleagues were a bit astonished about what I was able to do without using the mouse. There was like one funny story at my previous employer. I was working on a conference page with a team leader, and he told me that I should add a hyperlink at a specific place. For the story, it is important that he was standing like right next to me. So I just pressed a shortcut and the window opened so I could enter the link. And he looked at me in disbelief. And on the other hand, for me, it was like the most normal thing in the world. So I sometimes have such situations which showed me that like using shortcuts maybe is not as common for everyone as it is for me. And I think I would like to share that, because why should not everyone like profit from being more efficient? So one of the main reasons I use shortcuts is the time-saving aspect. And I think that developers often would like to be more efficient, but sometimes they just overlook easy things that they could do. And also, I didn't only want to talk about keyboard shortcuts, so I decided to broaden the scope and also look at other shortcuts you can take so you are a bit more efficient. So I think for a lot of developers, a lot of these things maybe you already know, but still you maybe don't apply it on a regular basis. So I hope that after this talk you have learned some more tips, or at least are more aware of ways to improve your development productivity. So I will explain how I started to use more shortcuts, more keyboard shortcuts, and then I will show you also more examples of shortcuts I take while working. So I also had a look at the productivity guide in IntelliJ. There you can see actions you perform the most, and you can also see that the code completion and quick fixes has already saved me a lot of time. Here particularly, keyboard shortcuts do not play that big role, but still it's maybe also a good place to see which actions you use the most, and maybe with which actions you maybe want to look up the shortcut. So what are advantages of keyboard shortcuts? First, you are more efficient. I think I don't have to convince you that in most cases, if you know the shortcut, it is you are quicker than just using the mouse. And there is another advantage I often experience. It is like I feel like I have less context switches. Sometimes when I am in the IDE and I want to look at another file, if I use the mouse, I have to look where is the file, and then I find it. And when I finally reach the other file, I maybe already forgot what I wanted to check in the other file. So I really like to just use Control and Tab to just look at the recent files. So I am, on the one hand, quicker, and I don't have like a context switch, which even saves more time. And I also like to do this when I switch between applications. For example, if I'm in the IDE and then I want to look something that I looked in the browser, I feel like I also am much quicker if I just navigate between the applications and do not have like a context switch. And another small advantage is maybe that you feel a bit more professional. So how can you start using more keyboard shortcuts? I think it is important that you adopt a mindset to look up shortcuts as soon as you realize that there is something that you do a few times. And it does not only have to be in the IDE, but matter which tool you are using right now, like in a browser, or maybe you have to do something in Word or so. If you do something a few times, it makes sense to look it up. And also, trying to learn shortcuts by heart, I think, is not really effective. So I think it makes sense to start adding shortcuts to your workflow one by one. So if you maybe have a new topic you're working on, you maybe also start to use other tools. And then it makes sense that you maybe just look up a few shortcuts that you maybe are using right now, and then you learn them, and then maybe if you work on something else, there are suddenly other actions you use, and then you just add the shortcuts over time. And also, I think in the long run, the investment to learn new shortcuts is worth it. And I know sometimes you also hear that maybe developers are lazy, and in my opinion, it makes sense to practice the shortcuts. Then after that, you can be lazy again because you're quicker with the shortcuts. And also, I recently switched from Windows to Mac, and even though I had to relearn a lot of shortcuts, I still think it was worth it. Also, luckily, a lot of shortcuts are the same across tools. This also helps to learn them and makes it more efficient. For example, the shortcut to add a hyperlink in Confluence is the same in PowerPoint. So you will see later on in the slide, I also added a few hyperlinks, and at the end of the talk, there's a QR code so you can get the slides and also see all the links to some helpful resources. And also, if you are a developer also you can look up the shortcuts directly in the tool or online. So for example, here I just showed in PowerPoint, usually on the right side you see the shortcuts. But if you don't find the shortcuts in the tool, you can always do a quick Google search. So I also think that if you are a developer of any kind of such application, it makes sense to make sure that the shortcuts are shown so the people can practice them and be more efficient. I even experienced that when I was on the plane from Switzerland to here. I was doing something, and then I thought I would like to look up the shortcut, but unfortunately it was a thing that I only had the tooltip that told me what this button does, but there wasn't a shortcut. And yeah, I didn't want to pay for the internet on the airplane just to look up the shortcut. Yeah. So another place you can look up the shortcuts in IntelliJ is the list actions. There you can see all the actions that exist, and also the shortcuts are written right next to it. Later I will also show you how you can create custom shortcuts. So you can create shortcuts for actions that do not have any built-in shortcuts. And in Visual Studio Code, there is also a keyboard shortcuts menu that you can look through. It shows you all the actions and the shortcuts. It also shows actions that do not have shortcuts, and there you can also create a custom shortcut. So there are multiple tools that can help you to learn shortcuts by showing them or reminding you of them. So there's the plugin Key Promoter X in IntelliJ, or in VS Code it's Key Promoter. And if you install this plugin, every time you press the button, there's a pop-up that says, oh, you could have used this shortcut. And especially in the beginning, I found it quite useful. I also heard that some people find it annoying that there's always a pop-up, so I think you just have to try if it works for you or not. But there are also multiple other tools that can give you a list of existing shortcuts. I personally use the Brewcask tool called Cheat Sheet, and I here also listed a few tools that are similar to what I am using, but when I searched, there are so many tools that can help you with learning shortcuts. So this is only like a small list of tools that are similar to what I'm using. And also I only focused on free tools. So yeah, there are many more. So here, for example, this is the tool I am using called Cheat Sheet. It's a Brewcask you can install on your Mac. And if you hold down the command key for a few seconds, it shows you the shortcuts of the tool you are. So here it is the shortcut for PowerPoint, but if I'm in IntelliJ, I can also hold down the key and then it shows me the shortcuts for IntelliJ and so on. So I think it's quite useful. So I also recommend to create custom shortcuts, because often you maybe do something often and there isn't a shortcut yet. Or sometimes you just cannot remember this specific shortcut because, I don't know, it's a weird combination, and then you can just change the shortcut to some letters that you know you can remember. So you can create this in IntelliJ or Visual Studio Code. There are also other tools that I listed where you can create shortcuts for your whole computer. So I'll show you quickly an example of how you can do it in IntelliJ, and as I already mentioned for Visual Studio Code, you can do it in the key map listings. So in IntelliJ, you can do the custom shortcuts in the settings. You search for key map, where you see all the shortcuts or all the actions. And for example, I often compare my branch with the master. So I was fed up with right-clicking, compare with branch, and then putting in master. So I created a custom shortcut for compare with branch. So when you right-click on the compare with branch, then this opens, and there I created a new shortcut. So I can do that. And also IntelliJ tells you if you do a shortcut that is already taken, he tells you, hey, this shortcut already exists, so you should probably use another shortcut. So, also some other shortcuts in your IDE that I find quite useful is the refactoring. So in general, I think there are a lot of things the IDE is good at, so why not use its help? So I really advise to use the refactoring functionality because it saves you a lot of time and also prevents you from doing mistakes. So you shouldn't just rename a name by searching every variable name, for example. So there are a lot of use cases for refactoring, and I also linked the pages where you can look into more. But also I did a small video where I show a few features. So it is like a temperature converter example that is not so beautiful purposefully. So I have like the scanner that is called Foo. So I used the renaming. Then also everything is in one method. I don't like that, so I extract the method. And yes, it's just a long method name. So you see that I converted it to a method, and then there's also a constant that I want to introduce, so I also use the shortcut for it. So only like a few examples, and there are a lot of refactoring possibilities, also like extracting something into a new class, and the list goes on. So also I think the code generation is quite useful, so especially if there are always some things you use often, like toString equals hashcode. I think it makes sense to use the code generation. And also the code completion, I think at least in IntelliJ also it got really good in the recent times, but I think also IntelliSense isn't that bad. So it really makes sense to use the help. Also, I really like the shortcut Command-Shift-Enter to complete the current statement. So if you write something and it proposes something, you can do Command-Shift-Enter, and then it takes what it has recommended, makes also the semicolon, and goes to the next page. And also another very helpful shortcut, which I also saw in the productivity report I use quite often, is search everywhere in IntelliJ. When you press Shift twice, it opens this page. So you can look through everything, or you can also click above and say you only want to search through classes or files and so on. So that's quite helpful. Another tool that I highly recommend is to use SonarLint. So I think there are a lot of projects that use Sonar, which makes a static code analysis. And in some projects, it's only on the server, and therefore it is often ignored, because you have purposefully to check whether there are any issues with your code. If it is possible, in your company, it is also helpful to analyze each branch individually. But this is a paid feature, and I know that some companies just do not want to pay for that. So also where I work right now, we only have the Sonar analysis on the server for the main branch, and that's a bit unfortunate. But at least we use also now SonarLint, which is directly in your IDE. So already when you are creating the code, SonarLint tells you, hey, there's something not good with the code. And so you at least get the information earlier before you check it in. There are other useful IDE features I recommend. I recommend downloading suggested plugins. as far as you see that it makes sense. Because, for example, you have like a new file type you are using, or another programming language, and in most cases, it's really helpful. And yeah, so I often don't understand why people do not download them if they would get more help. Also, I think it's really useful to add business terms to your dictionary, because sometimes you have business terms that IntelliJ does not know, and then it is underlined. And also, for my case, our business terms are mostly German, but the technical terms English. So if you have that case, I also suggest you download additional languages. Yeah, because otherwise you have more things that are all underlined. But also in general, I also suggest you should always question the suggestions, not only applying everything that the IDE suggests you, because it's still like an automated suggestion or an AI, and maybe it doesn't know in which context you really are. So in general, I personally really like to make sure that my IDE is quite clean, so I don't have a lot of things that are underlined. And if I remove these things like the business terms, and so I hopefully only see the issues that are real issues, and then I hopefully do not oversee them, because I think in our day-to-day life we experience too often that errors and warnings are ignored because there are just too many. So also another feature that has saved me a few times is the local history in IntelliJ. So in case you didn't do a commit yet, you can look at the local history in IntelliJ and find some changes you have done. And it's like Git but on your machine, so it's a bit helpful. And also live templates are really helpful. I also have a short video for this. So you can create live templates in the settings. I created the ideas so you can also simplify your workflow for things you do often. So for example, a logger debug statement, and then you just put in like with the dollar signs where an expression would be, and you have to tell him that it's with Java, otherwise he doesn't like it. So now I just can use the abbreviation I previously defined, and then the cursor is directly in the expression I want to fill in, and I can put it there. And that's only like a small example. I have seen examples with like a custom builder that was a bit different than the builder that usually is in IntelliJ, and then you have multiple expressions and so on, so it's quite useful. And also, if you use it, maybe it makes sense that you share these live templates with the colleagues, so the code also looks the same for everyone. There are also some helpful automations I recommend using. So the IntelliJ before commit actions, for example, activating code formatting, optimizing imports, running Sonalint. So then it does these things before you commit it, and it just helps to make the code better. Also, if you want to do something that works outside of IntelliJ and also across the team, it makes sense to use Git hooks. They have similar functionality. I also linked it, so if you want to look at it, you can do that. And another good idea is maybe to regularly run git fetch, because sometimes this gets forgotten, and then maybe if you want to rebase onto master, maybe you accidentally rebase on an older version of the master. And also automatic saving makes sense. So I also experienced that, because usually I work in IntelliJ, but if I worked in Visual Studio Code, sometimes I forgot to save the changes, and then I tested something that wasn't even what I changed because I forgot to save it. And also, if you use KeyPass, I also encourage to activate autosaving. I learned this the hard way. I once had to create some SSH keys, and I did that, and I accidentally got rid of all my changes. So I had to do it again, and we had to put that in a repo, so I had to do a pull request again. So that's when I found out there is an autosave option in KeyPass. So there are two tools that I also quickly want to show you, which can help you with version upgrades: Open Rewrite and Renovate. So here I have an example. I don't show you code because it was with my customer and I shouldn't show you code, but yeah, I had the possibility to try out Java 21 upgrade. So Open Rewrite is a tool that helps you, especially when you want to update a version or from a framework, or in this case, upgrading to a higher Java version. And Open Rewrite has so-called recipes that describe what should be changed, and the Java 21 upgrade is a particularly large recipe that consists of many small recipes. So you could also run only a small recipe. For example, every string format should be changed to formatted. So you see, I searched through 1,064 files, and 88 files were changed, and it was an effort of about 15 minutes. So I only had to do a few Maven commands, but it also works with Gradle, and it's quite easy. And just a few examples, what was changed, like, yeah, formatted was introduced instead of string format, or also get first instead of get zero, and also the instance of pattern matching was introduced. So it also like introduces new features that you do. It is not necessary to add these new features in order that the code works, but often when we do a version upgrade, we only do the bare minimum, so our code still is working. But there are often a lot of new features that are actually better, and we just don't do them. So in general, they do simplifications, use new feature, and it hopefully also leads to more consistency. But obviously, everything that Open Rewrite does will be looked at in a pull request before it goes into your code base, so you don't have to worry that everything will be changed. So Modern, the company behind Open Rewrite, also has a booth here. So if you have any questions, maybe you can also ask them, because I know a little bit about it, but they know much more, of course. Then Renovate is another tool that helps with version upgrades. It runs directly on your repository and creates a new pull request with version upgrades for libraries that you are having in your code. And it's also quite helpful because, yeah, then you don't always have to check every library that you have if there has been any upgrade. And yeah, still there's a pull request, so still you have control whether it will come into your code base. So also I encourage that you think about using existing libraries. Often it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel. But I also know that you don't want to simply add new libraries, because more dependencies make it more difficult and sometimes less safe. But also sometimes I also experience that you maybe already use a library, and this library has a functionality you want to have, but you then introduce another library for the other functionality, even though the first library you already used had the functionality you also needed. So maybe this doesn't make sense. And also, what I think is very important is, if you create a custom library, it is very important that you properly document your framework. Because like for every developer that was not directly in the process of creating this framework, they often have no idea how to use it. And yeah, it's more difficult because on the internet you don't find anything about how to use this specific framework. It is more difficult to also for new employees. And you also lose a lot of time if the people that develop the framework have to explain so much to all the developers. And sometimes even you have the custom framework is done by some people and maybe they leave the company, then you have even more issues that other developers have to figure out how this framework works. So I think it is very important that you make sure that if it makes sense to do a custom framework, at least make sure it's properly documented. So, yeah, and also I think sometimes it does not boost morale if it is more difficult to use. So, yeah, that's another reason why it makes sense to document it well. So there are a few more shortcuts that I can show you. One cool feature I use often is column selection, or it's also known as multi-cursor editing. I use it very often, but the name, I didn't even know it. I had to look it up for this presentation. So there's also a short video where I show it. So when you hold down the middle button of your mouse, you can select multiple, you can have the cursor in one line, and then I, for example, wanted to change, it's now called app server and not only server. Also, I know that there are much more advanced features even, so that you can have like a multiple cursor, for example, everywhere where localhost is written, and but this is like I think the initial multi-cursor editing feature. Does it? Right. Oh, now it does it. Yeah. So also another shortcut is to use the middle button when you are in the browser, and do you want to open a link. When you press the middle button, it opens it in a new tab. It's also quicker than doing right-click, open in a new tab. And maybe also use the back button on the mouse. I personally have to admit I don't use it that often because it isn't, I think my thumb doesn't like it. So, but if it works for you, that's great. Also, it makes sense to maybe use GitHub Copilot, JetBrains AI, and ChatGPT, but it is important that you check the company policy first, especially when you want to insert code. So, or maybe you also have a specific one. Where I work, we even have like a specific AI version that I think is built on ChatGPT. And yeah, just make sure that you use it responsibly and not enter any data that should not be entered there. So there are also some few pitfalls when you want to learn or when you want to start using more shortcuts. So you have to be careful, like custom shortcuts or shortcuts from a tool could override an existing shortcut. In the most cases, it's not that bad. Usually, you realize it if you do a shortcut and something else happens, then yeah, you can maybe quickly make sure where is it. Is it like in the tool itself, or maybe I also had like the list action didn't work because on Microsoft on the Mac it opened the man page, so I just had to deactivate it in the system settings of Mac itself. And luckily, for example, IntelliJ also has usually informs you if there are some shortcuts conflict. Also, be careful when refactoring. Sometimes IDEs are almost too good. So I also sometimes had this issue that I want to rename something, but accidentally somewhere else there's a variable that has the same name, and then it renames everything, but you don't want that. So yeah, sometimes you have to be careful, but in most cases the refactoring is really helpful. And also, unfortunately, keyboards shortcuts are not the same across platforms. Yeah, but I also as I mentioned, I already switched from Windows to Mac, so it is still possible. And I also think that it's important to not be too hard on yourself if you forget shortcuts, because you just can't look them up. So, when not to take shortcuts? I think it is very important that you still keep a proper code review process. Yeah, because obviously it is important that multiple people look at the code, and that's one place where, in my opinion, you should not take a shortcut. And also, in general, think about what the tools propose to do, and do not ignore any warnings or errors. And also, like, when thinking about the tools, for example, Sonar also sometimes has a lot of false positives. So think about what it is, and maybe you can also mark things as won't fix, because you see it is a false positive, and just to make sure that it won't pop up every time. So in general, I think it's important to consciously decide when to take shortcuts, just to not make it worse. So in conclusion, I think it's very important that you have a mindset change, that you know that if you do something often, that you think about, can it be simplified or automated, or at least look up the shortcut to learn it. And maybe it makes sense to start to try one new shortcut or automation technique each week. And also, I think it's important to do what works for you, and it's also important to find the balance, because if you only try to improve your workflow but do not save time anymore, it does not help either. So, yeah. So do what worked for you. So I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. As I mentioned, under the link you can find the slides, where you also will find all the URLs I linked. Yes, and thank you for your attention. I'm also here for questions, and there's also, as I mentioned, there's Swiss chocolate here.